Welcome to Parallax, the resurrection of truth, beauty, and goodness. Parallax.
So welcome, guys. Welcome to another Parallax podcast, an edition of Sweeny versus Bard with Pickerill, and also an introduction to Alexander Bard's new course called Zufism, which begins April 2nd. And we're here to talk about Zufism, whatever the hell that is. So I guess that's my first question here, Alexander. What is Zufism?
Well, I'm interested in going to the really profound depths of the origin of religion and theology and philosophy and spirituality. And I think the best place to look for it is the Silk Road. And I've been there before. All you familiar with how the whole book Process and Event was developed and how it eventually came out. And a lot of people on the Internet Deeper were credited in the book as well. So we had several interactive process when we wrote Process and Event. They're familiar with that territory. So I want to go even deeper into that because I think the world today is splitting into a new dark age. I think Tim here, I guess today agrees probably on that assumption. And it's splitting into kind of a new dark age. And the only place you can find a home in is kind of a tribal subculture of some kind at best, because all that identities are right now falling apart. And therefore, I think it's only right to go back to the trade routes of history when we at least were peaceful for a while and started trading with each other rather than went to war, and start looking at the tricks. And why are these concepts, why is religion, theology, spirituality, philosophy, why are those concepts developed? And what we're doing at the course is that we're going to look at the exoteric versus the esoteric, which is a topic I really want to take on with you guys today, because you're both really, really deep into Vajrayana Buddhism and into Zen Buddhism, and I'm deep into Zoroastrianism. So I think that conversation is definitely set for tonight. Then also we're going to look into the aesthetics of minimalism and Baroque, because they both appear. We've got two ends of that, which is like India on the one hand, which is the psychosis of Asia, and we got Japan on the other hand, which is the neurosis of Asia. Like I said, I would prefer to live in India over Japan. When I travel, I certainly prefer Japan over India. So you like the benefits of neurosis, but you don't want to be neurotic yourself. So you prefer to be psychotic if you have to choose. But that's what we're going to look at too. And also, you can remind me, Andrew, how to set up the course. We set up the esoteric versus exoteric, the minimalist versus the Baroque, and the dialectics between religion and philosophy itself. I mean, what is religion and what is philosophy, and why does philosophy come out of religion? What happens when religion becomes so organized that the only way to think freely is to basically invent philosophy? Which I think actually started in Persia, but certainly happened in parallel both in India and China. So we have this rich history of the Silk Road. We're not going to write a history book. We're going to write a philosophy book. And why is Zufism? Well, if you take Zen and Sufism and throw them together, you get Zufism. So it's a word that we actually own by now. We own the domain name, to start with me and my team. And but there's also the party race for me personally as a Zoroastrian is, of course, to look into Sufism and go back to its origin prior to Islam, where actually Zoroastrianism and Buddhism are the two origins of Sufism, as I know today. I just said that in an interview for an Indian magazine. They asked me about the next book, and I said, well, the next book is actually going to be us taking Sufism back from the Muslims, because the Muslims aren't appreciating Sufism enough. It deserves better than its current treatment by the imams and the mullahs. So we're going to take Sufism back, add a Z at the start, and then try to formulate that as philosophy.
Okay.
So that's the project.
Well, maybe I'll pass it over to Tim for a minute, and maybe, you have some insight into this, the crossover between religion and philosophy. Maybe we can start like as it's structured in Alexander's course, this dialectic between philosophy and religion. Do you have any thoughts about that, Tim?
Yeah, well, first I would push back against Bart a little bit on the darkness aspect, and just say that really I appreciate that. We've talked about that a lot in the IDW, but I kind of feel like we're coming out of a dark age of the monotheistic overlords and scientism and the nihilism of and anti-worldliness of religion and the nihilism of science, and even with and especially with the Enlightenment that brought down religion and left a void. And it's the void is what we feel as the darkness.
I agree. I just want to point out, when I say Dark Ages, it's a positive for me. So I love Dark Ages. I'm into Gothic and emo and all those things too. And for me, the Dark Ages is a much better period than what we're leaving behind. I agree with you. And in this sense, scientism is falling apart completely. I live in the most secular part of the world, Scandinavia, which isn't secular at all. It's still Christian Protestant, aggressively so. It's just pretending it's being secular because people can't handle a secularized society. It's just impossible. They go back to religion subconsciously, and even worse than they would do otherwise. Even dogmatic religion is preferable over the sort of subconsciously practiced sort of guilt-tripping sort of Protestantism we have in Sweden today, for example. So I agree with you. So, but let me just point that out, that when I use Dark Ages, to me, it's also a form of freedom. It ties in with game B theory from Jim Roth. It ties in with Max Border's work at the Intellectual Deep Web on decentralization. And I think our opposition to sort of a forthcoming massive police state that controls us all is going to be that we retract from it, pull out of it, go rural if we have to, and create these communities that cannot be controlled by the outside world. Now, of course, there's got to be chaos and anarchy to a lot of people, but I don't mind at all. I think that's the only way forward. So when I say Dark Ages here, I mean it in a positive sense.
Yes. So I would, with Andrew, you're pointing towards philosophy. I would point to its real origins, which I would say was in the Hellenic world, the meeting up with Egypt. And all the great philosophers pointed, whether or not it was real that they did it or not, they pointed to traveling to Egypt, traveling to India, traveling to Persia, and bringing back a love of wisdom, the meaning of that word. And all of these have light, and the bringing forth of light as shining the light of wisdom onto the world. And these are local manifestations, and that's important. We mentioned the world religions, and that was one of the main problems, was that they tried to be world religions and not local religions. Religion is local, and philosophy is personal.
So I guess we're sort of quibbling over the meaning of darkness and light. I mean, in the Vajrayana tradition, you have fierce black deities, and they're rather fun. But they're black, they're dark, and that's symbolized. The symbol for that is that that's supposed to be a form of wrathful compassion, fierce compassion, not a sentimental, namby-pamby kind of compassion. And then you also have these light, luminous sort of beings, and so this is in the iconography, of the practices. Whether they're real or not is another question, but
You have that distinction of light being an order and darkness being a chaos, which is often repeated in religion. But
yes and no.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in a lot of the practices, like silent meditation and Kriya Yoga and even some of what we believe is the practices of Hermeticism in late antiquity was closing off the senses, going into the darkness, but there in the darkness you meet the light.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fourth jhana is you've closed off everything, you've gone through the bliss, and then you meet up with it's startlingly light, sound, and the smell of roses is what they classically point to. And I can I can confirm that. Many other people can as well. This is a real thing. Eyes closed, entering into the darkness, going through the dark night of the soul, transforming. You know, the in Vajrayana, we have oh, help me out, Andrew.
What, the Malakalas and or the practices of going in, sitting in the darkness for a long time, or
no,
shunyata, the black
special means. No,
shunyata is sometimes described as emptiness, which Chogyam Trungpa called a blackout. You know.
Yeah,
like,
no, I don't mean that. I mean using the world as a special means.
Skillful means is the
Skillful means. Sorry,
means.
thank you.
That's probably the. It's called upaya in Buddhism.
And going through the world, not rejecting the world. Although, you know, you have retreats where, you know, you go into darkness, dark retreats and whatnot, but you're always coming back to the world, and you're using what you meet in the world as a transformative mechanism to reach back to the world and the light and love.
So a couple of things here, because I want to stick on the topic of philosophy and religion. So often we think of philosophy in terms of Greece, and you didn't mention Greece. You mentioned Persia. You mentioned.
We all know that the Persians used the term Yasna about 1500 years before the Greeks used the term philosophia for the first time. And Yasna means love of wisdom. It's simply borrowed. It could have been Egypt as well. And what I'm interested in here is that Tim immediately jumped onto comparatives with Hermeticism from Egypt and Vajrayana from Tibet. And I'm really interested in that division because these are the two territories I'm least familiar with, the ones we're going to study for the Sufism project. So
yeah, and I just want to finish my thought here because I just wanted to say that in Western philosophy, we think of philosophy as just completely a conceptual, you know, kind of game, right? But you started describing a bunch of practices. So maybe we can go into that, and you know.
It's kind of, yeah, what we have today is that if you think of it like two axes, you got polytheism and monotheism. If we simplify it a lot, there's more complexity to it. It's not that we had polytheism replaced by monotheism or anything at all. We've always been polytheistic. Human beings are polytheistic to begin with because we worship different archetypes. We worship different role models. We're different kinds of people. Men and women are different, etc. So it's just that the question is, when is monotheism introduced as an idea? Well, probably to lead some kind of an elite that has to have a unified dogma or unified idea, or even better, unified language or unified culture, so they can lead. So it's when you start developing ideas like how do you build an empire and maintain it over time, which the Persians did 3,500 years ago, then you have these ideas that maybe monotheism, and to me, that's the beginning of philosophy, in the sense that you try to unify people around a certain idea. If you unify them around a certain idea rather than a certain practice, you've already moved from religion to philosophy. Now, these people practice both. It's obvious that people had religious practices, which were non-dogmatic, and then they had dogma, but the point with the dogma was not that I'm right and you're wrong, and we're going to fight over who's got the right dogma, which is ideology later in history. It's the worst thing human beings ever did, to be honest. Rather, the dogma was seen as a shared belief that we share, and therefore we create a community around that idea. Because if you're going to have an elite community that controls large populations, you need something to agree on. And that's where I think philosophy started. But if you have the polytheism and monotheism, the other one is monism and dualism. It's like, is everything in the world connected with everything else or not? And if everything in the world is not connected with everything else, then are there at least two substances? And that became, in Western monotheism, in Islamic Christianity, it became that because you had monotheism and only one God, then God became separated from the world. And suddenly you have a divine substance, for some weird reason, like Plato has, for example, and then you have the earthly substance. And then, of course, suddenly the divine substance is higher in the hierarchy and the earthly substance is disgusting. And then you get sort of vulgar Gnosticism and things that come out of that. So I would say that what's important here is when we go into these esoteric practices, do we agree that we are in a polytheistic world, of many archetypes? And do we agree that it's also monist, that all these different archetypes are somehow connected with one another? Because then we're really, really located at the foundation of both religion and philosophy, I think.
Yeah.
And
So
this
what
is
Tim said
exactly
was-
the opposite of Islam and Christianity. They both went the other way. They went dualist and monotheistic. And this is where they totally leave reality entirely, according to
I'd say that the polytheistic, and that wouldn't be a term that you'd use in Vajrayana. You talk about deities and yidams, and they're as Tim says, they are skillful means, you know.
Yeah.
It's archetypology.
Yeah, and we use the word iconology. I hate polytheism. I hate the term. It's just ridiculous. Iconology, we call it as well, and archetypology is even better. Let's stay with archetypology, where,
Sure.
of course, post-archetypology is the idea of a god separated from the world. It sounds absurd because obviously the world is archetypological, humans are archetypological, our society is archetypological, our worldview must always be archetypological. So we can stay with archetypes. Yes.
And this, late antiquity with the theurgists, which we're not entirely sure what they were going on about, but there are some hints in the Corpus Hermeticum and talk of closing off the senses to meet the one. They talk about purifications that we're familiar with in Vajrayana. And a major distinction that happens there is the difference between the Hellenic philosophy and way of life that embraces the world, where the demiurge is in union, this is Vajrayana, with nature, in a love affair that creates this world. And so God is not a personal God, a God of a name, but the monist unity of however you frame or think of the spiritual, and it's not in opposition to the material as an evil, as a fall. And the Gnostic, so the real split that I see is the difference between the Jewish apocalyptic cult influence into Gnosticism and original sin, the fall, the evil that creates the world, versus an Egyptian philosophy where, Egypt was the temple of the universe. You're working with a divine entity. You're the Jivan Mukti. So the theurgists theurgy of Iamblichus is like the Vajrayana deity yoga, where you're bringing the idea, the archetype of the deity into your heart, into your being. There's no separation. And that split we see creating Christianity, and you're talking about really a control mechanism when we're speaking of the monotheistic religions. These are religions of warlords and control mechanisms, versus the very local and personal of philosophy, of the different philosophies, different schools. And so I think that's very important I have, here's little guru yoga, and not just guru yoga, but everything that you do in Vajrayana, you start off with a statement of your position, and it's very different. You're stating that you're recognizing the preciousness of human birth. Not
opposed to the original sin, you mean, or the.
Yes, and you're not, this life is precious. It's not something that you're running from. And you're recognizing the impermanence of it, and you're recognizing cause and effect, that your actions mean something. So, take charge and transform, and we take refuge. What do you take refuge in? Something, well, you recognize your own ignorance and that you have something to transform, and then you look to the teachers, the teachings, your community. And this is all very important versus a Christianity that removes this possibility and places it under an overlord who's done it for you. The event, you don't get the process to get to the event of transformation. It's done for you, and it's through faith that you proceed, not through your own actions, your own goodwill. And it, despite, the dogma, people within Christianity obviously, do rise up against that internally, all the protestations of love, of course it's there, but that's because it has to be there, and it's fighting against the, your drive to seek God goes against the dogma and says, no, this is all about love. Whatever the Nicene Creed says, or the books, the Quran or the Bible, it still comes out that, family is important, and your local community is important. And those are the things that we see that come out of those religions that are validating to the universe.
But that, like you said, they were medically perfect for a feudal society. So here's the point of Christianity and Islam and why they took off and became huge. They were missionary. There was an inside and outside. If you don't convert, you're a sinner. But if you convert, then you're saved, both in Christianity and Islam. And of course, then in Christianity and Islam, it's all about going to the mosque on a Friday or going to the church on the Sunday. It's all about that. It's all about the congregation and keeping you inside there and keeping you in your place. So you work 6 days a week and you go to the mosque or you go to the church, and then you're told that you're being saved because you worked hard in the field, you're being saved. And because you're saved, you're going to go to heaven when you die, and whatever, the Mahdi or the Christ or whatever is going to come back and then restore everything to its former beauty, and the original sin will finally be over. But the problem is that the Mahdi and the Messiah never occur. I mean, we've been waiting for the Christian Messiah for 2,000 years. About time to get over it. It was the biggest lie ever, So the question is, why was this the biggest lie ever? Because of dualism. It was precisely because dualism is the requirement for the original sin concept. And then the question is how to get rid of original sin. Well, obviously you cannot work your way out of it. So it's not about becoming enlightened. It's not about going on a spiritual journey. It's not about finding your archetype, which would have made sense. No, it's all about everything is packaged, done for you, as long as you work hard 6 days a week, and then you die. And then you'll go to heaven when you die. And nobody's going to go to heaven and find out whether it exists or not. So you can lie about it for as long as you like, for thousands of years, and fool people into this idea. Now, this is the big lie. The big lie is Western. The big lie is the Christian and the Muslim lie, and certainly it's been to a large part a Jewish lie as well, because Judaism, after it was influenced by Christian and Islam, picked up the same idea. So we can call it Abrahamic. And I call it the Abrahamic lie. The question is, what did other people do that were the minorities at the same time during antiquity in Egypt, Persia certainly, and definitely in India, China, and eventually in Japan? What did they do instead? Well, they completely ignored original sin. They believed everything in the world was interconnected with everything else. They believed in the personal journey. They believed in the personal freedom. And their monist worldview that they approached was, of course, a worldview of archetypes. So you switch the whole thing around and get a monist worldview, and because you got a monist worldview, you get archetypology. And I think we all three agree. You guys started searching for it. You found Vajrayana, you found Zen, I found Zoroastrianism. We all had to leave this entire Abrahamic shit, and we had to leave the even worse thing that followed, the post-Abrahamic enlightenment with scientism and all those things, which is just totally anti-spirituality, anti-religion, anti-depth or anything. It's just nothing but bland, boring consumerism, which is exactly where Western culture has ended up. And it's a dead end. So now that we know it's a dead end, the question is then, so what is it that we can learn today from the Hermeticists that you are a big fan of, Tim? And what can we learn from Vajrayana? And then certainly, how can we feel in Zufism? How can we feel in Zen? How can we feel in other monist traditions and learn from them, which is what we need to do now?
Well, maybe my answer to that would be magic, right? Because I think Protestantism in general, I'm fond of Catholic mystics and I'm fond of certain non-dual Christian
But you're
strains.
fond of the way you're fond of a
But
Netflix series, but we're talking about something much
we don't
serious
have
here.
to have this argument again.
Yeah.
In any case, I think what's lacking in the Protestant view is this magical understanding of magic, right? So we have philosophy on one hand, but we have kind of philosophy without magic, which just becomes sort of propositional or rational or
What do you mean with magic here? Is it with C or CK at the end to begin
no,
with?
no, I mean practices that, affect, the as Tim was saying, the local, the
It's
locality.
intent.
Mhm.
Magic is about focused intent.
Yeah.
There's various versions, but it's focusing your intent, knowing what it is that you need to transform and following a set of practices, a regime to manifest that transformation. And one thing that unites all of this that we're talking about is practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
The beautiful
Zoroastrianism.
thing
I
about
can give you an
Zen,
example from Zoroastrianism, how that works. It works every day. This is the practice of
Yeah,
Zoroastrianism.
every day. Yeah.
It's the humata. The humata is the contemplation in the morning. Where am I at in life? What did I do with yesterday? What did I commit to? In what way did I succeed? In what did I fail? What part of that was luck? What was just bad luck? What was good luck? And I see the entire process. And I see myself as nothing but myself is nothing but the negation in a world of processes. So I started looking, identifying with these feedback loops that I'm getting involved with, which is the humata. And then I'm not finished with the humata until I know what I'm up to. And then I make a commitment, which is the commitment to the practice that I'm going to practice at least that day, which is the hukta, which is the second step. That's a commitment. When you raise your hand, it's like, I hereby commit to and identify with that I am the person myself. I am the person that is going to do these things. It's realistic. It's probably a bit challenging. It's going to take me further. It's going to make me expand. It's going to make people around me expand. That's called asha. The principle of asha is that, which also means truth, also means that it's expansive by its nature because I do the process, because I do the humata, and because I make the hukta commitment. Therefore, I become part. I'm no longer just a luck or somebody fooled around. I become an agent in the world through the hukta. And then the practice itself is the vashta, which is the third step. That's the rest of the day until I go to bed. And then the next morning when I get up, I repeat the whole thing. So every day, 7 days a week for me is the mata and the hukta and the vashta. That's the Zoroastrian way of doing exactly what you guys are talking about here. And you can, of course, do it deeper. You can go to retreat. You can go really deep into it. You can just do it as an everyday practice because it's basically one of your work days. You got to go to work and you got to make some money and, pay the bills of your family. So you get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee. Then it's a 5-minute humata. The hukta comes after the coffee starts kicking in. You go to work that day. You deliver that day. But sometimes you have to go really, really deep with something instead of deal with something. And then the humata, the hukta, the vashta becomes different.
and would you say beyond just a daily practice that key to this is the view?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is very much a Vajrayana.
That's where philosophy comes in, perhaps, like, because you're always trying to refine the view.
You suddenly discover that out of the 10 people that get things done, one of them has been lucky, and you're the second one because you were committed to something, and the other 8 have no idea what they're up to. That's why Zoroastrianism became elite religion by coincidence, because Zoroastrians are the most successful people ever. They even beat the Jews at everything: academic education, wealth, whatever. Any measure you want, how long their marriages last. They last until they die, because they basically make a commitment to marriage and they can fuck anything that moves. So the idea with Zoroastrianism is that it became a very successful minority religion. It's been very happy being a very successful minority religion because the practices work.
Yeah.
This really makes sense. You realize you walk into the room, you just look at where are the other committed agents in this room who know what they're up to and are committed to doing the right thing today. Oh, they're very rare. Okay, so if one of them succeeds in this room, it's just going to be plain luck. Except for me, I'm going to succeed because I'm committed to a cause that I've decided.
To circle this back to your question about Hermeticism and what it is about that, for me, it is exactly this: the view. And we don't know a lot about the practice, but we know that they were bringing in the archetype and becoming the archetype, the Jivan Mukti. But if you don't have the proper view, then your starting point completely bends
For
you
example, like in Vajrayana, you have deity practice, right? And deity practice is you're given a deity. Like it could be a ferocious warrior type. It could be a woman, a naked blue woman. It could be all kinds of strange things. And you identify with that deity to an extreme point. With mantras and visualizations, and the world around that deity. Um, you know, you do that very extremely, and this transforms you from the inside out into the deity. But the deity isn't something solid, real. That's Vajrayogini. It's not something. It's a skillful mean. It's not an absolute, but it is real. If you think, this is what Tractum says, if you think a glass of water is real, or if you think your eyeballs are real, it's just as real as that, or even more so if you're so engaged in this kind of practice. So I think it's very transrational. I think but you do have to have the philosophical basis before otherwise it's going to be something just weird, right?
Well, it's definitely archetypology. That's exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. So the question is that are you going into the archetype that you're supposed to be to contribute to the community, or are you training yourself to become any archetype? You could try different archetypes, see what they're like, or is this an archetype which is part of a general archetype or larger archetype, and you're just training an aspect of who you are?
I don't
How does that work?
I don't think I think that it's different, because I think you're given an archetype from somebody else. It might be the opposite of who you are. It might be something that's so opposed to who you are that's the learning process, or it might be you need to harmonize with who you are more so it's closer to who you are. It's quite mysterious.
It's like tantric work. You can't do tantric work unless you're as a man, get dressed as a woman, put on the makeup, put on the skirt, stand in front of a mirror, and suddenly discover you're pretty hot. You can't do tantric work unless you also go through playing the woman, because otherwise you don't understand woman. Woman becomes. It's not that woman isn't attractive. It's more like woman is nothing but mystery.
Yeah.
And it's confusing. And why not instead go into the female archetype, become woman, be totally immersed in it, then get out of it and realize, okay, now I understand what it is. Wow, now it's really becoming attractive. Now I can really play with it. So
Yeah, it's like becoming trans,
this is why these ideas, cross-dressing, and these ideas in the creative sense come from tantric Buddhism. I mean, there's a reason for it, right?
Yeah. But I don't think it's you're going to become trans, you're going to become a woman. It's more like you embody the woman. It's a theatrical thing so deeply. Then actually you can become more masculine that way, because you know the feminine archetype more from the inside. So
again, it's archetypology. In Guru Yoga, you becoming Vajrayogini to then be embraced by the guru, the masculine entity. We have that in we have that all over the place. And this is crazy wisdom,
Yeah. But the point is, like, there's an infinite varieties of relationships and what you can work with and energies. And it's not a reified platonic thing. It's something very dynamic that you can work with.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what I want to add to archetypology is here's the more Darwinian evolutionary aspect of the whole thing. And this is why men and women are different, and the different types of men, different types of women. When I do, of course, I do a lot of men's work. I just came out of an ayahuasca retreat this weekend with 20 men. It was amazing. Only men in the room, nobody else there. And when I do this kind of work with men, then it's definitely playing around with the archetype. And the peak experience is always when a man starts admiring another man for being different from him, admiring another man for being different from him and for having qualities he doesn't have himself. Because only from the self-confidence of actually knowing your own archetype, know how you contribute, can you actually seriously admire another man for being whatever he is. And this is how men then learn, by admiring each other, learn they can also admire a woman for being really powerful as a woman. So you get the larger archetypology of the whole sociant, or the whole tribe eventually, which I think is the point with spiritual work. And therefore you get this intense respect towards people who are different from you and how they contribute differently than you do. So that's a general lesson to be learned. Then of course you can go beyond that into time to just start plain curiosity, the way psychedelics do not have to be meaningful to you. You can just go into psychedelics, for example, because of curiosity. You can go into deep contemplation, deep meditation out of curiosity. You can play the blue goddess, whatever you like, out of curiosity, because you're just eager to find out more and you just want to know more. That's perfectly fine too. But for the sort of for the use of the sociant itself, where I'm committed in my ukta, is first and foremost contributing to the survival of my own community.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the fact that my humata in the morning is not finished until I'd figured out, and I'm pretty finished with what my current feedback loops look like. And I managed to drop the druish. I managed to drop the feedback loops that are going destructive, that are shrinking me, that are shrinking people around me. I managed to drop them, get out of any resentment. So resentment is dropped. And it's not until the resentment has been dropped completely and I go into heroic mode. And heroic mode is a cup of coffee, go to work, heroic, right? So when the heroic mode comes in, that's only then am I ready to do the hooked on the commitment. Before that, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I think all these practices are designed to break down any kind of mechanical identity that you cling to, your childish identity, you're the mother and father of this person. And so we reify our identities as we grow up. And Vajrayana practice is right, like it's about really deconstructing the identity fully as possible. And I think admiration is, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is the key. In a way, it's love for the teacher, and in this particular tradition, it's very important, but it's just admiration is how you absorb the qualities of the good qualities of that person, and you don't remain within your limited sort of mechanical modes of being.
Perfect time to bring
yeah.
in Sufism.
Hmm?
Perfect time to bring in Sufism.
Yes.
Talking recently about starts with a Q. Help me out.
Kalandaria.
Yes.
So I'm a big fan of Zufism, and I want to say Sufism from Islam because they don't appreciate it enough. But it's also the two most controversial forms of Sufism I'm talking about, the ones that imams and mullahs have always persecuted. Bektashi and Kalandaria. And Kalandaria comes out of Persia. Bektashi comes out of Turkey a bit later. Essentially, Bektashi is the Turkish Ottoman version of the originally Persian Kalandaria. There's also Sufism coming out of Mesopotamia, especially out of Baghdad and Damascus later, but that's definitely Islamic Sufism. It often tends to be dualistic, and it serves Islam in a different way. What the Kalandaria did was that they were Zoroastrians, clearly, because the Kalandaria were pissed off with Sufis running around in Baghdad and Damascus, taking pride in how spiritual they were. And how we all hate these people who always claim, oh, look at how spiritual I am, performatively.
Oh, yeah.
They just sort of banal, superficial form of spirituality. The world is drenched in today, like New Age, shit like that. So So they were pissed off with that in Persia, and Zoroastrians are always pissed off with anything, when everybody tries to claim anything in public, because Zoroastrians are incredibly skeptical of anybody who leaves the tribe, walks out of the tribe with pretensions to be better than the tribe. That's in Gathas by Zoroaster, warned us. 3,700 years ago, Zoroaster in the Gathas warns us and says that the people who walk out and become pillar saints and sit on a pillar in the forest and claim they're higher than the rest of us by doing nothing, kill them. This is like the hatred in Zoroastrianism against pretentious is enormous. And this is what I clearly see in the Kalandaria. So what the Kalandaria did, you can summarize the Kalandaria Sufi culture with one sentence. You're much closer to God in the brothel than you can ever be in a mosque.
Yeah.
So you
This
see how
resonates
similar
with
this is to crazy wisdom in Tibetan
yeah.
to Buddhism? And remember here that Buddhism and Zoroastrianism together, they make a massive contribution to world history because they kill blood sacrifice and they kill caste systems. The end of the caste system, which was pagan, you're born in a certain place, you must stay in that place because otherwise you cause turmoil in the world. So don't you dare get out of the place you're born into. The end of the caste system and the liberation of human beings to their full archetypological potential starts with Buddhism and Zoroastrianism. That's what they have in common. So the Kalandara Sufis could very well be inspired by Buddhism. They were definitely deeply Zoroastrian. And like Zoroastrians often did, they hide under the Islamic flag, pretend to be Muslims or whatever, but in reality, they're working as a rebel force within the community.
Yeah,
And
well,
historians today, they all say the same thing. Well, Sufism starts in Zoroaster. The first Sufi is Zoroaster because you read the Gathas. It's the most fantastic Sufi text ever. Sufism really is Zoroastrianism from the very beginning. That's the point.
When
yeah,
you
and I
get
think
you
along
have
the
the
Silk Road, there were
illumination.
all these different tribes, right? And they didn't have such strong reified identities. I'm a this, I'm a that. There was all kinds of crossover between, Hindu and Buddhists and Zoroastrian and, all the different traditions. So they didn't.
But once you leave the exoteric and go to the esoteric, you can forget about any defined religion at all and dogmatics at all. Esoteric is subscribing to the universal. Esoteric is describing to esoteric brotherhood anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
That's what esoteric is. There's no fight between the esoterics. The fight is always between exoteric dogmatic cults. It's always these square-headed imams, mullahs, priests, whatever in the churches who fight each other and kill each other massively because they're fighting over fucking dogma. It's always in the exoteric. You don't find those. You can find a lot of madness in the esoteric, certainly a lot of psychosis, whatever you want to do. But you don't find war. People don't go to war with each other in the esoteric. The esoteric is the only thing I would claim in the new book. Go to claim. Esoteric is the only thing that unites the world. It's the only thing that crosses borders. The only thing that transcends cultures, nations, everything. It's only the esoteric that does that. And that's why I'm interested in your experiences from the other esoteric traditions where I'm not as well versed as you guys are. That's exactly what I love this conversation.
This
Sorry,
is where
Tim, I was talking over you. What were you going to say?
I was just going to bring up the Sufi illuminationists as well. So you have that aspect of the light coming in, I suppose.
Clearly Zoroastrian origin, because the light and the dark as metaphors are deeply, deeply Zoroastrian. Of course, yes.
And then, in Zen is interesting because you have, I'm not against Zen, but I think that for a novice, Zen practice is great. Zen meditation is a stumbling block. It's not where you start. It's Dzogchen, Adi yoga. It's the highest yogas. You're supposed to have already, done multiple practices to work through your dark side and transform before you get to those higher practices. And that then is where with Zen practices that you enter back into the world and you're doing worldly things in a spiritual manner.
Yeah. Well, I think Zen has failed a lot in the West because you're trying to import a monastic system into a secular culture. And so it becomes kind of a Sam Harris type of, you're just taking the technique of, or people are going for like 7 days Zazen retreats and whereas the real Zen people, it was a full-on kind of like thing, right? It was your entire life, and so we want to take a little piece of Zen, and so yeah, and also there's different, all kinds of different
We have that problem in Japan too,
yeah,
because you
yeah.
get a guy like DT Suzuki, who obviously saw the opportunity of exporting Zen to the West and got really popular and became one of these sort of Gandhi type guys that people in the West celebrated. But when I started studying Zen philosophy really seriously 4 years ago, and by the way, one of the projects I'm going to do where you guys can be involved as well is I'm going with Joachim to Korea in May to stay there for an extensive time, because I know Japanese Zen really well. I want to know Korean Seon better. I then want to go to China as well to know Chinese Shan better, so we can get the connection between these traditions all the way back to the connection with Zoroastrianism and Buddhism in Tibet and India. So that's going to be mapped. We're still not writing a history book, but I need the full, complete history to understand that completely, to do a real great philosophical work, because I think the nuances from one tradition to the next, we can basically put at the margins and then start looking at the continuations instead. But we're going to do that this year. So that's definitely coming up. And
One of the interesting critiques of Vajrayana against Zen is that Zen is a form of quietism or monasticism, just sitting silently all the time. And whereas there's much more sort of
this is what I did. So
exoteric
I forgot.
yogic things in
Because
the
my point was that
Vajrayana
Suzuki
tradition.
and these popularizers are actually very superficial. But when I go to Nishida and Nishitani, sit down with them, I know even John Favark agrees with this, but with Nishida and Nishitani, you get the real thing. These guys know their shit. They know Hegel and Nietzsche in detail before they start doing, and they start looking for what is lacking in Hegel, for example. And they discover pure experience, as you would expect if you're Zen, you practice it, because pure experience does not exist in Hegel. And suddenly they have a whole new understanding of negation, which is even more profound than Hegel's, believe it or not. And that is what I love. So I love Zen philosophically. Yes, I do the practice. I'm Rinzai Zen, so has Andrew been for many years. I do my kinhin. I have to walk because I can't sit still for too long. So I do the practice, but it's not important to me. I'm not a fucking pillar saint or anything like that at all. And I'm not buying into the aesthetics of Zen, which I think is the Sam Harris version. Oh, it's cool because it's Japanese. I can dress well. I look cool. So I look cool as an influencer because I'm Zen. Well, that's just a totally superficial version of it.
Yeah.
But it's Rinzai and Soto it's all about. And Soto is the very much you sitting part, which is bigger in Japan. And then you got the more expert Rinzai part, which is, of course, perfect for me. I'm a philosopher and I contemplate. I'm a Zoroastrian. So I get the koans and I get a mind game that I can play with instead, which I then, of course, immediately turn into, is it a constructive feedback loop? Is it creative? Which is perfect for me when I do their inside practice. So you see, I can connect and borrow from two different traditions and merge them in that sense.
Because Rinzai has a great wisdom tradition, like Vajrayana, really wild characters. The lore, the stories of these characters are just always amazing and wild, and people just the most eccentric, extreme characters you can imagine, and they're the ones that people adore and tell stories about.
Exactly like in Sufism, it's exactly the same
And
thing. You got
Sufism too,
Hafiz, you got Rumi, and you got the Kalandara Sufis, and you got the Bektashis. That's exactly, and they're the rebels, against the conformist society constantly. Because what else would you be for a shamanoid personality? Nothing else makes sense. Here again, since you find them both in Japan and in China and in Korea and in Persia and in India and in Tibet, they're clearly esoteric. You go towards crazy wisdom. You go towards a monist worldview. You go towards a very deeply personal practice. You call it magic. I call it tomata hukta rashta. Same things. So the point here is that these things are repeated. They come back again. Because once you go towards esoteric, you find the universal. That's where you find it. You don't find it in exoteric practice. You never find the universal in dogmatics. You don't find it you don't find the universe in political ideology. You only find war and conflict. That's what you find.
It's kind of counterintuitive, because you would think that the big religions are trying to be universal all the time. Whereas
no, they tried to claim universal truth at the cost of everybody else, which is always a lie. So they buy into the noble lie. Usually it's not even noble, it's just a rotten lie. So they buy into the lie and then they sell the lie. And this is, of course, with Buddhism, when Buddhism got influenced eventually by Manichaeism, you got Pure Land Buddhism, which is where I lose interest. It's just like, my skepticism towards Pure Land and all that. It could be metaphoric, whatever you'd like it. But, as soon as you start talking about having a rainbow body the day you die, you're not going to die, you're going to live forever or whatever. This just borrowed from Manichaeism. I think it's alien to Buddhism. It shouldn't be there in the first place.
Well,
it's a cop-out. Cheap feudal tricks.
It isn't Tibetan Vajrayana, but
rainbow body's big in Vajrayana.
Two things. We've talked about this a lot. The confluence of Hellenic, Persian, and Indian philosophy in during the time of Alexander, with the Dionysian cult entering into the Khyber Pass area where our Padmasambhava comes from, and all of that. So I wanted to throw that in there, but
yes, I love that. Padmasambhava and Bodhidharma are going to be incredibly important for my book. So let's go there.
But great. To briefly with the Sam Harris mindfulness stuff, the problem that you get with that is the lack of the view. And the studies that they did of, what's the effect? Well, you take an asshole and you give him a practice to make him be an asshole that is, at peace with it.
A more efficient asshole.
And yeah.
An asshole that makes more money.
All the Silicon Valley dudes are right into this Sam Harris meditation, right? You get the feeling like, the tech world gurus, they're all into that, but they don't have that spiritual depth, right? Or philosophy, or aesthetics, or anything. They've just taken the most shallow version, the Yuval Harari version of Buddhism, and they've sold it everywhere to a elite bunch of autistic techie dudes. That's what it seems like.
That's because you did the same thing with Christianity. For whatever it was worth, you took the rich traditions of Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, and all the decent guys who at least convert to those to get some kind of aesthetic richness, and a cultural history, whatever, to go with it. And then you get Protestantism. You just make it cheap. You make it packaged. You make it individual. It's perfect for nation states. That's why Hegel loved it, because Protestantism is perfect for a nation state to make people, work for the army, work in the factories, whatever. And that comes over to America, then it becomes just money spending. It becomes Pentecostal churches that you go to church, and because you don't dare to do drugs, you pretend you're high. You're high. It's called speaking in tongues and prophesizing or whatever. And it's all about, if you give away your money to the church, you become even wealthier. And then they export that to South Korea and on to Asia and on to Africa. Like, any poor person is dragged into a big crystal church on a Sunday to give away his money, to be fooled into believing that if you go to church every Sunday, God will bless you with more gifts, meaning more money. It's just pure capitalism. Of course, that culture leads all the way to Scientology. It leads to the despicable American heritage of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Scientology. I'm sorry, I'm not impressed with American religious innovation. It stinks. And then, of course, when that culture, with that sort of self-improvement culture at the cost of others, runs into Buddhism, all they do is pick a few things, a few styling, a few little techniques, 10 minutes a day, really efficient, thrown together with diet and Botox shots, and you call it American Buddhism. Of course, it's superficial. And of course, Silicon Valley has nothing else to offer.
And judgmental.
Of course, yes.
Moralistic.
Yeah.
And, back to...
totally super ego. It's driven by super ego all the way through. And the only thing that's even harder than your super ego is actually your judgment of others, of the other next to you.
But then we have Dionysus and the Dionysic cults and the Padmasambhavas and, the Vajrayana and the practices that work with the faults.
How is Dionysian here, coming from the Greeks, different from, because I can see the Persian heritage as well.
That was my question too. Yeah.
And then the Indian Shiva Shakti. So Shiva Shakti Kali, Shiva Shakti, Shiva Vishnu Kali, whatever. So Shaivism from India and Dionysianism from Greece are to me almost identical. You see, to me, it's like the tragedy of the West was that Shaivism won in India, but Dionysianism lost in Europe. You know, that's kind of what was great about India was that they did share Shaivism and definitely preferable over the alternative, whereas Christianity won over Dionysianism in the West. How's your take on that, Tim?
Well, it's crazy wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worldly. Dionysus is Osiris, and Osiris is cut up into 14 pieces, and that's the world that you got to put back together. The dark night of the soul is going through that dismemberment that you then have to rebuild a new being. Horus, the Horus mythology of Horus on the horizon, his eyes, you know, the single eye rises as the sun of a new start, this new being that you have worked on and created through practices with a view.
And of course, this is like the foundation of esoteric religion as well, anywhere you look, because in the West, when Christianity closed that door, you get the Freemasons and all kinds of other things instead that sort of take on this, at least claim this tradition. I don't know how serious the Freemasons really were. Some of them probably were quite serious. Otherwise, were probably more superficial, like, you know, American Buddhists are today. But it comes from this, and they claim it came from Egypt and with large Persian influences as well, right? So this mixes with India, with the Indo-Greeks, Gandhara, Odiyana, you know, where Padmasambhava comes from. I personally believe that Gandhara was definitely an influence, but I think Padmasambhava came from current Tajikistan, where I locate Orayana in my work. So I think Orayana is actually north of the Hindu Kush, directly north of it. And directly south of it, you got Gandhara, which is like the northwestern corner of the Indian subcontinent, which is green and beautiful. It's got rivers and got plants everywhere and millions of people living there and rice terraces. The Swat Valley, which is beautiful. You go to Peshawar as well, and you realize what this is definitely a place where religion can come from. This is definitely a place where religion can come from, right?
The Oxus River.
The Oxus River is further north. So the Oxus River is literally north of the Hindu Kush. So the Oxus and the Asantis rivers are the two rivers, the Surdarya and the Amit Darya, leading all down to the Aral Sea. This is the second Mesopotamia. So the two Mesopotamias.
Bactria.
Yes, Bactria and Sogdia are located along the northern Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia meaning two-river country, the northern Mesopotamia, where Zoroaster came from, which is the origin of Central Asian religion, Homa practice, psychedelics, everything you want, all those best things coming out of Eurasia come from the two-river system leading to the Aral Sea. This is the northern Mesopotamia. The southern Mesopotamia is the one we usually call Mesopotamia, is Euphrates and Tigris running down into the Persian Gulf. So you have two different two-river systems that build huge civilizations during the Bronze Age. And Zoroaster comes from the northern one, contemporary Uzbekistan. That's why people go there. It's a huge tourist country these days because it's one of the most fantastic countries in the world when it comes to history and culture. So that tourist system, that's the Oxus and the Arashantas, and they are Alexander the Great reaches there. You got Alexandria cities there as well, but it's Sogdia and Bactria historically, and this is the origin of Bodhidharma. But I would place Padmasambhava's origin, which is definitely, I agree with you, has a Dionysian Shaivite strong influence, Christ's wisdom. Padmasambhava, I would place him in Tajikistan. But you could put him in the Swat Valley if you want to, because that's a conventional stuff. This is called Odiyana. This place is Odiyana. It's like a sacred place you come from. And if you've been to the Swat Valley, it's very easy to believe, if you're a Westerner, this must have been Odiyana because it looks stunningly beautiful. It's clearly placed, drenched in spirituality. You go north of Peshawar and you discover that, oh my God, this is a place where people could invent great ideas, certainly. But if you go north into Kush, you come to Tajikistan, where most people haven't traveled. You arrive in Dushanbe and you go into the mountains, the Power Mountains. Same thing, it's just stunning. And the traders who came from Sogdia and Baktria and went to China and came back and were immensely wealthy because they traded with the Chinese. They then traded with the Persians and with the Indians to the south and the Persians to the west, and on to the Egyptians and the Greeks further west, and the Babylonians. So they were intensely wealthy, and Sogdia and Baktria was full of wealthy traders. And of course, in hindsight, people describe Padmasambhava and Bodhidharma as they must have been Indian princes. But you don't find a single trace of them who were in India. They clearly came from Central Asia. And this is why I find it so easy to see the connection between Zoroastrianism and Buddhism, especially expressed in Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
It's even the part, the less dogmatic part, it's even the Mithraic part. It's a Mithraism, which is so closely connected to Vajrayana Buddhism. That's where you see the closest connection. Whereas the other part, Zurvanism, has had a strong influence on Zen. And that's Bodhidharma when he went to China.
Another thing we haven't spoken of, you mentioned ayahuasca and Homa. And
yes.
this was one thing in late antiquity that was killed off by Christianity and, of course, Islam as anti-drug, that was instrumental in changing your view. You go and do the...
I love that. I love this. This is my takeaway from this amazing conversation, Tim. The view. The view. Yeah. I tie the view to both pure experience and to the infinite now. The two most extreme states we can experience. The infinite now, like total bliss, and the pure experience is just plain pure experience, no self, nothing there. Both experiences are view-driven.
Yeah. Yeah, it's intellectual.
I love how this is where you get credit, Tim. The view is central to esotericism. Absolutely central.
Yeah,
entirely.
And the view is on many levels, right? In Buddhism, view is how you see something, right? It's actual, seeing something, and it can also be an intellectual view, but it also can be your view of reality, your ontological view, which changes when you do these kind of practices. So when we talk about view, there's multiple layers of Buddhist view, right? Or tantric view, so we have Hinayana view, which is a narrow path, which is a path of discipline. We have Mahayana view, which is wisdom and compassion, and then we have Vajrayana view, which is the resultant path, which sort of starts. The view is that you're already there's already enlightened. You're already enlightened, and you just have to remove the obstacles. So there's no more sort of linear path, and you're moving into. So the view gets more subtle, and more strange and more subtle as you move through the different vehicles of the view, right? And so Buddhism has vehicles, right? There's 9 yanas. Yana means vehicles, and there's each vehicle has a different view, and the higher vehicles contain all the lower vehicles. The lower vehicles don't really understand the higher vehicles. Like Sutric people don't really understand Vajrayana. They can't, but Vajrayana has to include Sutra, and and then there's a Dzogchen view, which is sort of something even where you just deconstruct everything all over again.
Expansive.
And it's sort of beyond any perspective view of self or other or anything at all. So there's this whole structure of views in Buddhism, which is very, let's say, it's educational, it's sort of organic, and it's not linear, because you can start with the high view, and then if you're not good at the high view, you go to a lower view, and you can go backwards and forwards through the different views of Buddhism.
It's like you take the humatas and Zoroastrianism and have different humatas, so different levels of them. So I would say that for humata, hokta, vashta, this would be view, commitment, path.
Mm-hmm.
And then the path you pursue, you then sit down, meditate, contemplate the next day, and go back to the view. So for me, it's just Zen rock garden. It's right what it is. I mean, there's a reason why there's always a part of the Zen rock garden you can't see from the position you take. So your view is not just sitting in one place. You actually have to go to another place and sacrifice a certain thing to then gain access to another thing. And that's a different view. And then you have views, and then you start using the views, and that's what we call the parallax in philosophy. By having different views onto the same relationship, to the same object or the same relation that you're studying, you start seeing it. And you start seeing it, and when you start seeing it, there could also be a feedback loop that you're engaged in yourself, in your life, which is your current life situation. Then you just take that onto, okay, end of the day, this day before, because I have to pursue the path. End of the day is that I now, from what I know, I take this decision here, I commit to it, and then I pursue the path. Because tomorrow I'm going to return again and then have an extended view simply because I have an extended path. So then what you did in Buddhism, I've never seen in Zoroastrianism, was basically you said, well, then they can be different. You can think of views at different levels of complexity. So you cannot handle probably the top view here. Or maybe you have an archetype, you can handle it, but the other views you can't handle. You depend on other people for those views until you figure them all out.
Yeah.
I think the view is the curse of the Western world is in the our the view that has been handed down by the Abrahamic religions of a fall out of chaos into a world of suffering, which is actually a stumbling block for a lot of people in Buddhism to take the view that life is suffering. You know, suffering happens as part of life. It is not all of life. Your goal is to escape that, not to escape life, but to escape suffering. It's a very different framing of that view. And then with scientism, we get a nihilistic view. We're all supposedly heading towards an entropic heat death. We're all going to fall into a black hole. Everything's going to explode. Everything comes out of explosion. The Western view, whether it's religious or from science, is a view of death and destruction.
It's a apocalyptic. The scientism view is an apocalyptic religious view, right? This is what like scientific rationalist people don't understand, that they're actually practicing a new religion.
Yeah, guess where that came from.
Yeah.
Like again, they think they've gotten over Christianity. At least Jordan Peterson's right about this one thing. Although he's returned to Christianity, I don't buy that for 1 second, but I think it's just to make money, to be honest about it. But for the fact that Christianity is still around everywhere, yeah, it is. I see it very clearly in a place that pretends to be secular, like Scandinavia, which is just full of Protestant moralism wherever I look, and the worst forms of it, the subconscious forms of it. It's not even aware of the fact that it's still so damn Protestant. There's a woman, Katarina Barling in Sweden, who just wrote a brilliant book, by the way, and she's foxy and sexy like hell. But now said that, but she's just brilliant. She's just written that we think we got over Christianity. Well, we did, but we didn't get over Protestantism. Couldn't get out of it. So it comes back with a vengeance, worse than ever, but by not being informed of what it is. So that's where we're stuck, essentially. I think that nihilism is even worse than the scientific variety, because scientific variety can at least claim that it's trying to somehow go towards a nihilism which it finds to be more serious, or at least takes itself seriously. But of course, it's also a cheap way out, because at the end of the day, like we wrote in Pros and Event, I said, I have to go to Jainism in India, at least acknowledge that if I look at the world over a 60,000 year perspective, it's just damn rebirths everywhere. There's no end to anything, to be honest about it. It's just rebirths and rebirths.
People are kind of waiting for the end of the world in the West or something.
Yeah. Sorry, but yeah. If you start looking at hypertime rather than space-time, which you guys know that I do my philosophy, but the first thing you discover is the quality of hypertime is that there's no beginning and no end to it. Oops. All right. That has consequences for a worldview. Yeah, you can forget about a linear-only worldview. And this is what Christianity and scientism and Islam have in common. The linear only. They're not linear and circular, which is the right way to see the world. And the struggle with the dialectics between circular and linear.
So back to Hermeticism and the view, I said this before. the world is the temple.
Yeah. I mean, that's a religious view. A religious view is about kind of worship, right? In the positive sense, like love something, worship it,
And celebration.
adore something in a very extreme way. And it's not about figuring stuff out and some kind of, mapping out sort of like consciousness, or that's part of it as well. But I think that I guess Alexander calls it the pathic aspect. I think we try to push that away a lot. Both the
I
pathic
think the, I think the
and the
rational
mythic
I think
aspect
the
of it.
rational aspect of the world was appreciated and rewarded by capitalism. So it got stuck as assumed to be the only truthful aspect of looking at the world. You're absolutely right. And the other version is there, which irritates anybody who goes into that mode and claims rationality all the time. And I say it's just the pathic aspect of it. And I just look at them and say, "What? You don't have a sex drive? You're not horny? It's not a curse on you? It isn't everybody else." Well, that's a perfect example of the pathic drive. It's there constantly. This denial of death drive, denial of the drive, is what we see in these people who don't understand the reason why they always prioritize what they call is the rationality, simply because the system appreciated it. So when there was competition on the capitalist side between people who tried to be successful at making money or having social status, they were rewarded for being rational about it. And therefore they assumed that that's the way to look at the world. When in reality, no, that was just rewarded in a specific historical paradigm. And reality is that you're human, other humans are also human. And sex and violence is the most dominant mode of their lives.
Yeah,
And
sex and violence. So
yeah,
Vajrayana is a religion, if you want to call it a religion, that has it doesn't push away sex and violence. It doesn't deny sex and violence. It doesn't try to escape sex and violence. So the images, all the images of Vajrayana are sexual or violent. So what does that mean? It's about transforming those energies, right? It's not about, just stupid hedonism
exactly. Don't deny
or
them.
mindless
Yeah.
violence. It's about transformation of these intense energies that we can't avoid through, rationalizing them away or any other means.
So Christianity denied them, tried to suppress them, and Islam turned them into resentful forces. So Islam excuses sex and violence as resentment. That's why Islam regularly goes totally violent over the top, because the only way for them to get access to sex and violence is through warfare. That's the tragedy of Islam. The Sufis always contradicted that. That's why they were persecuted by the other Muslims, because the Sufis contradicted it. Whatever they were, how mad Sufis might have been, at least they would deny and go straight to sex and violence, have direct access to it to deal with it directly. And that's why I think the Silk Road and the Silk Road Triangle is totally superior to Western culture, for the simple reason that it has direct access to and no denial of sex and violence. It totally embraces the fact that sex and violence are disharmonious, unbalanced. There's no point of a salvation or any point to find anywhere, because it's like Hegel says, the dialectical deadlock is the state of things. There is no other state of things. So Hegel recognizes this. Nietzsche recognizes this, which is
But
the
also
total embrace
Gerard
sex and
wanted to go
violence.
before the Greeks, right? Gerard wanted to look at, a theater and paganism and, the older things before we to look at the like basis of human, conflict and struggle and sexuality and mimesis and all that. So I think it's like there's some way in which I think what I resonate in this conversation is we have to go, have to go prior to the Greeks, or we have to go
Absolutely. And Girard's mistake is to start with Christianity and claiming Christianity stopped blood sacrifice and all that bullshit, because that's a lie. It's just, he probably was really irritated when he got old and discovered that actually he would be exposed to that lie eventually as well. No, it was Zoroastrianism and Buddhism that broke with paganism, in the sense that paganism created caste societies and blood sacrifices. So if you want to get rid of caste system blood sacrifice, you have to go to Buddhism and Zoroastrianism, because they both totally deny that. And that's why Zoroastrians built fire temples. They said, yeah, you build the fire, you have the fire, only you don't put blood on it. Fire only. That's why the fire is not in itself divine. It's a symbol for the divine, in the sense that like Zoroaster says in the Gathas, you can put anything you like on that fire, but there's nobody listening. At the end of the day, you only put something on that fire for yourself. That's exactly why I put the sandalwood on my Zoroastrian fire with well wishes towards the people I love the most in life, because I'm contemplating on them and I'm contemplating my relationships with them and their relationships with each other. And I just want the best for them in the most constructive way possible. I'm in an Ashavishta mode, and then I put the sandalwood on the fire.
Yeah,
So, so if we have, so we got ideas of being local, of personal practice, and a view uh, of life being filled with light, not darkness. What is
a positive, constructive view of the world, in other words, right?
Yeah, it's the motivo switched into libido. That's just the most natural thing in the world. Every morning you wake up and you want to stay alive and you want to live for as long as possible. The libido is in you. And there are people who become incredibly impressed and the motivo takes them over. That happens. That happens too. But for the vast majority of people who are alive, the libido is there. And that's why we build on it. And the libido leads you to be heroic. The view you take with libido is to be heroic. It's only when you take the view and you're poisoned by the motivo that instead you take the resentful view of the world.
So what is Zufism?
Zufism to me is to connect the different esoteric traditions, gambling on the idea that they're all one and the same thing with just different local cultural expressions. And those expressions are minor, therefore historians to dig into. As a philosopher, I want to see if Zufism is the term for the different traditions along the Silk Road that connects them. Because I'm looking for an answer towards a sincere spirituality for the 21st century.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they are all connected and are all the same.
I can see
level,
I can see similarities. I can see similarities in Peruvian Mexican traditions. That is why I'm convinced that we're going to go. And Ethiopian traditions, we're going to study for the new book. My team, we're going to go to Ethiopia and study Wakefana. So I am convinced they're going to hit the nerve there. The esoteric lies there. And therefore, I've never argued this before in the previous 6 books. I love the idea that this book challenges me. But the basic hypothesis is that esoteric is the only place for the universal. There is no universal anywhere else. And it's beyond language. So it's also beyond dogma. And the irony is I'm going to write a philosophy book, which is dogmatic, claiming it.
Yeah.
But definitely,
all these traditions are so different too, but ultimately they're just different ways of sort of, different ways of transforming us towards that one view kind of thing.
Yeah, but I have to kill a lot of shit on the way. Like we just sort of slaughtered Sam Harris from American Buddhism, There's so much garbage out there. There's so many pillars saying to make so many claims. There's so much false shit out there. So part of the work is to dig through that as well and then basically declare why it's dysfunctional and why it's not applicable. Because I want to get into deep esotericism that actually starts to make sense where the universal can be found.
Well, this is something that comes up with, mysticism as well.
Yes.
Mysticism everywhere is very much the same.
Yes. It is esoteric. Yes.
Yeah. I think
mystikos in Greek means beyond. What's beyond words, what's beyond language. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, mysticism has a negative rap as sort of dualistic, but I mean, Vajrayan's a very hardcore, earthy mysticism. It's not a flaky, kind of spiritualism. We have to, because a lot of people, when they talk about mysticism, they're thinking some sort of flaky kind of spiritualism, but it's a very hardcore kind of endeavor, mysticism, like.
Andrew, you know me. You know that I love to take on words that have bad connotations and then prove people wrongly use the words in a new way. Yeah. You know that I took on the word religion 50 years ago, and finally people are coming around to the idea that it was probably a strike of genius to actually do it and redefine it and take it back to its original etymological meaning. I'm not afraid of a word like mysticism at all. The people tell me it's going to be an uphill battle to use the term, I'll use it. So if mystikos, again, if you look at the meaning of mystikos, that's what mysticism originally was. If you have any other interpretation of it, then fuck you. I don't care. My job as a philosopher is to crush people and the prejudices and the preconceptions by insisting
Yeah,
on an idea that that I'm on fire about and that I think is correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
the same problem with the words yoga and tantra. You can't talk to people about either one and have a realistic conversation because they don't know what they mean
No,
anymore.
but we've sat
don't-
here for years. We've had this conversation before about
Mhm.
using Tantra and Sutra as the esoteric and the esoteric and the exoteric. So, which makes sense in a fundamental sense. You can have reservations about it, but let's not go into word use in this conversation because that to me is superficial. What's important here is to go to the thinking behind it and the practice. And you guys are great at this. By the way, we have to round off this first conversation we're having. I'd love to have another one further down with the project. And Tim, your inputs here are amazing. And we have to talk more about Hermeticism. You are the expert on it of all the people I know. I mean, it's you and Neil Sedlak out there who really dug into Hermeticism properly as a sort of a monist tradition coming out of Egypt. It fascinates me the same way Wakefera from Ethiopia, Shoving culture from Peru, and of course Tibetan Buddhism also fascinate me. They fascinate me because there's so many things in common, despite coming from so many different places, and I find that incredibly interesting.
I'm working away at it. I'm trying to write something up, something new on specifically on that. I did Western Tantra last year, and then in the meantime, we've had a wonderful book by Gregory Shaw, Hermetic Tantra. Just recommend everyone to read.
Sure, great. It's on my reading
Fantastic.
list before the summer right
On my
away,
reading
right
list too.
there. Yeah,
Cool,
absolutely.
Matt. Well, are we moving? Maybe we want to tell everybody to come to Alexander's course on April 2nd. And
We start on April the 2nd, and Andrew's going to help me out to do 3 sessions in April, one week each. So it's over a 3-week period. They're going to be campfires afterwards without me, so I'm not in the room, which is better. But you're going to have question and answer sessions with me after I do these course sessions. So the course is going to be on the fundamental aspect of why we're doing the Zufism project, why the word is there, what is this book about, why am I on fire about it, why is this the next big thing I want to do after process event, and if you go into that process, it's also an excellent opportunity to go to Parallax and learn how a philosophy book comes about. How's that process? How does it work? And instead of just reading books and quoting them in the book, I might as well run into interesting people at Parallax who get quoted in the book and get credit for it, because that's what I did with the last book process event. So I'd love for the same thing to happen. So the book will not be written before I've actually done these sessions with you guys and get an input from you guys. For example, here with Tim pointing out that the view is really, really important, because the view and then the commitment and then the path is how all spiritual work has to proceed.
so, yeah, this is our goal in the course also, is to create conversation around these ideas and long-term conversation, deep conversation around Alexander's ideas. So I think it's going to be amazing. I hope people
You need
will.
the experience though too. This is all
Yeah.
very experiential.
Yeah, but my job is not to give people the experience. My job is to write a philosophy book. And I have very clear admiration because I have my limitations, my constraint when I do my work. But hey, I was just at an ayahuasca ceremony in Denmark. By the way, it was an ayahuasca ceremony. All the ingredients used were Iranian rather than Peruvian. It worked wonderfully. So yeah, it was a homa, basically, a homa ceremony. But when I do that kind of work too, I just practice that. But I don't ever write about that. That's definitely beyond words for me. That's just another part of my work. But when it comes to writing this book and nailing a book on Sufism and nailing a book that says that this is beyond words, therefore it cannot be in this book, that in itself, I think, is a fantastic
Well,
statement.
mysticism is entirely based in paradox too, isn't it? Like in that sense, right?
Well, paradox you can't write about.
Everything
That's
is
dialectics. That's what dialectics is. So
dialectics. Okay.
yeah, or paradoxology, if you want to use that word. You can certainly write about paradox and make claims about it. And the philosophers have done that ever since Hegel. So that's okay. But no,
What I mean is, though, that is it mystical statements are very often, like Zen statements, are very often extremely paradoxical, because they're trying to break down your banal perception of what it is, which I think
the world is fundamentally dialectical, period. Any kid who tries to nail a square inside a circle and try to circle inside a square realizes the world is full of laughable oppositions that are unsolvable. Yeah, continuity and discretion. You can start right there.
Nice.
So the world is full of contradictions. It's fundamentally contradictory. As soon as different exists, that's the difference itself is the precondition for existence. Becoming, not being, is the precondition for existence. So if anything can exist at all, it must be different from non-existence to begin with. And simply for that reason, it's fundamentally dialectical. So my philosophy is already there with you, Andrew.
Okay, so maybe that's it. Maybe we got it. Yeah.
I did got it for this first episode. Love talking to you guys, but I think we rounded off here. We're almost an hour and a half into the conversation, so I think this is perfect for the first episode. So I'm going to start on April the 2nd, but I would love to reconnect with the two of you together in this setup with the three of us. Maybe after we've done the 3 sessions in April, you and me, Andrew, then we can call Tim back in. And by that time, Tim, I want to go back to Hermeticism and dig deeper.
Okay.
I found it incredibly interesting. It certainly has influenced Greek, Roman culture, Western culture immensely, for real. And I want to see what the Egyptians actually brought to the table.